Welcome to the Nature's Image Farm podcast. We're glad you're here. I'm Greg.
And I'm Susan. And together we're raising 7 kids on the farm and learning life lessons along the way.
So pull up a chair, rest your heels, and let's talk all things bees, homesteading, and the old-time ways.
Let's get after it.
If you're interested in nukes, packages, queens, or supplies, visit us on the web at naturesimagefarm.com.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Nature's Image Farm podcast. If you're tuning in live, the stream team live beekeeping chat, thanks for tuning in. And if you're listening to this later on a replay, thanks for spending some time with us. Tonight, we're going to have a great conversation, a fantastic guest, and we're excited to have Dr. Cameron Jack on talking all things bees. Dr. Cameron, thanks for spending some time with us tonight. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invite.
You're welcome. One thing that we like to do with the stream team is it's not about us. It's not necessarily just about our guest. It's about the beekeeping community. It's about how can we find ways to work together to do right by the bees. We say it a lot, but like the honeybee is to the hive, we're better together. So we try to find ways to blend all the things that we're all uniquely good at and find ways where we can just keep being that change that we want to see in this world, keep doing better with our beekeeping, keep our bees alive, but more importantly, be that lighthouse to others in our community and try to share great information, try to share our experiences in the bee yard. And I think it's one of those things that a rising tide raises all ships. So Dr. Cameron Jack, we are just so excited to have you on tonight. But before we get going, if you're new to everything going on tonight, we've got Brian from Castle Hives up in the northeast part of Ohio. We've got the Dothan Shogun, the man himself, Bruce Jenny, down in Dothan, Alabama, with Bruce's Bees. I'm Greg. We're here in Nature's Image Farm in Zanesville, Ohio. Dr. Cameron Jack, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you're up to, and where do you think we're going as beekeepers this coming year with our bees?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, yeah, again, my name's Cameron. I'm originally from Southern Nevada. I always the joke is like, does anybody even, when I speak to audiences, like, does anybody even know anybody from Nevada? Like, almost never. Like, nobody knows anybody from Nevada, right? So it's just me and my family that live out there. So I grew up in a small town outside of Las Vegas, Nevada, and my grandpa was a beekeeper. And so it was something kind of I grew up around. I always kind of joke around too, is like, I liked beekeeping before it was cool, right? Like when I was a kid, it was weird. And and it wasn't, I mean, it was one of those things where I didn't really get into it. It was until later in life, until college. And my cousin kind of took over my grandpa's apiaries, and so I just wanted to do something. I knew I liked biology, and I just kind of was like, well, what do you do with this? I mean, if you're not a doctor, I started down the medical track because I just assumed, like, what do you do if you like science? You go be a doctor. And then I took, I had my first cadaver lab, and I was like, meh, that's not for me. So I'm out. And so I just started taking a bunch of classes. I had one class that was entomology, and that was just like a very broad overview of insects in general. And then I kind of like a light bulb. I was like, oh, you know what? Like, I love bees. This was a really interesting class. Like, maybe I'll look for something. And I ended up doing a master's with Ramesh Zagili. He's a professor there at Oregon State University. So I went to Pacific Northwest and researched honeybee gut pathogen called Nosema serrana. So, I mean, you guys probably know that, and some of the listeners do too. But, in reality, I was going to all these bee clubs in Oregon, and I was sharing my research, and then 100 hands would go up at the end of the presentation, and then they would all just ask me about Varroa and Varroa control. So I was like, oh, well, if I'm going to go on for my PhD, I might as well study Varroa and Varroa control, Varroa biology, so I could better answer some of these questions and solve some problems that people are dealing with, right? So I came to the University of Florida in 2015 as a PhD student under Dr. Jamie Ellis. And it was great. So the last few years, I've just been almost entirely focused on Varroa control and studying that. And then I had a really unique position. A teaching lecturer position came open while I was still a PhD student, and they were looking for somebody to develop like a beekeeping curriculum and like bee courses. And I was actually on the search committee of that as like a student. They invited me to be on this faculty search committee, and we had our first meeting, and everybody kind of decided we didn't really love all these candidates, and so somebody asked the question, well, if you have a master's, could you still do this position? And somebody's like, yeah, I guess so. And then I was like, wait a second, I've got a master's. Like, I could potentially throw my hat in the ring here. And I did, and I got it, which was great. And so for a while, I just had this really unique position where I was just 100% focused on creating beekeeping curriculum. And I did that for a few years. And then a new position kind of came open in the university where they were able to change my position description. And so now I got to keep the teaching that I already wanted to do. So I kept all those beekeeping classes that I was developing. And then I started being able to do more of my research. So I finished my PhD and I focused in on, I continue to do Varroa control. I do a lot of small hive beetle work. I kind of worked into a groove where I've kind of focused on insect toxicology, like in general. So toxicology is like the study of chemicals and using chemicals to control pests or pesticide impacts on honeybees. And that's kind of where I've landed. And so I've been a faculty member at UF for about 5 years now. And we're loving it, loving this. So that was you asked for a very brief introduction. And that's what I gave you, is like 7 minutes of me blabbing about myself. So give me talking about myself. It tells you what kind of guy I am.
Well, that's great, because it does give us a better, at least a better kickoff point on I think where the conversation will go tonight. For folks who are just tuning in for the first time on a Stream Team Beekeeping Chat, I wondered if we could maybe just go around the room here and just kind of introduce ourselves. Brian, Brian and his pet on his shoulder. Oh, I am missing. Usually I get to brag because I've got the world's only Varroa Mike, but Mike's taking the night off. He had a busy weekend down at the Honey in the Hills, West Virginia beekeeping conference. But Brian, introduce who you are to folks who are listening tonight, and how Varroa mites play into what it is that you're doing, the goals that you're trying to accomplish with your beekeeping.
Well, so everybody, those new, I am, of the three of us in the Stream Team, I'm more of the hobbyist. I'm located in Northeast Ohio. This 2023 season will be my 7th season, I believe. And I try and stay, and now, Cameron, watch the reaction of the other two here. I try and stay in the hobbyist realm. I'm at 11 colonies now. Had great success with the winter. I had 100% survival rate this winter. So the challenge this year will be, how do I stay in that hobbyist realm without expanding, too far? And my job, my everyday day job somewhat limits my time. So that's why I stay more in the hobbyist realm and not, I don't move into the sideliner. For Varroa, and I have my handy model here that, keeps me in check. Varroa really has gotten me to focus on a lot of my techniques and like my pest management, everything that, in the Master Beekeeper program that I'm going through now, great material within that program. But, just so those on here know, now in my channel, typically you'll see that I show everything. And that everything even includes 2 or so, I think it was 2 years ago now, where I lost all of my colonies just because I did not manage them properly. I did not treat, to take care of my Varroa. And, that led to, I went out just to check them, and I think it was February or so. So it's probably been 2 years ago. 2 years ago, a month. As I was going through my apiary, literally it was, checked a colony, they were dead. Checked a colony, they were dead. Checked a colony, they were dead. And that, I took that as it was a positive experience, though, because I looked at, well, where did I go wrong? And I knew just by looking and going through and dissecting colonies, I knew what I did. There was just Varroa everywhere. And I'm just like, ugh, I need to really take a step back, look at what I'm doing, move forward in a different direction. And I've done that and have been a little bit successful now. So, Varroa, I tend to, I want to stay on top of him. If I've learned the hard way, as I think everybody probably here has, if you don't take Varroa seriously, well, they're going to knock you down and they're going to let you know how serious they are. So, that moment 2 years ago, really, I take it as a positive, just because had that not happened, who knows where I would be right now? Would I have the healthy colonies that I have now? Would I have that, that system in place, to manage my colonies as far as Varroa control? So I can't honestly say that I would have that in place. So that's just, I guess, the short, 4 or 5 minute long speech. But yeah, I'm the Northeast Ohio hobbyist beekeeper. So.
Well, that's awesome, Brian, because that's going to continue to play into tonight's conversation as we kind of dig deep. It'll give folks some context as to where we're all individually coming from, I think, which will help give a little bit more depth to the conversation. Bruce, for folks who are just learning about Bruce Jenny at Bruce's Bees, can you tell folks who Bruce Jenny is and what you do as far as beekeeping down in Dothan, Alabama?
Well, I'm Bruce Jenny, and I have a YouTube channel called Bruce's Bees. And I started beekeeping 10 years ago and started off just as hey, I think it'll be cool to have a couple of beehives on my mom's farm, and immediately was obsessed with it. And now I'm firmly in the sideliner camp and just loving it, working hard. I do have a full-time job. I work in a hospital as a physical therapist. And so pretty much if I'm not at the hospital, or if it's not Sunday and I'm at church doing things like that or spending a little time with family, I'm either in the bees or messing with my YouTube stuff. And so I'm just obsessed with both of those things. And, but I started off, as really not knowing anything. It's interesting because today, memory came up on Facebook from 9 years ago. That was the first year that I had any swarms that happened. And, I started 10 years ago. So the next year the bees were coming out of winter and they were, I guess, obviously a little bit too strong, and they started swarming on me. And a video popped up that I posted. It was just a Facebook video. I didn't know anything about YouTube at the time, but I was standing in the back of an ATV on a ladder trying to catch a swarm about 10 feet up. And it was the most just stupid, dangerous thing, and shortly after I learned how to catch it with a bucket and a pole, so you don't have to climb up on the ladder in the back of the ATV. And so I've learned so much since then. But I just really enjoy the bees. There's something about these bugs in a box that it is divine. It's therapeutic to me. I just love it. And I'm competitive by nature too. So I want to be the best I can be at whatever I do. And I feel like I'm mediocre at most everything I do. I'm pretty good at a lot of things, but I don't feel like I'm great at anything to speak of, but I'm trying to get better. It keeps me at a place to where I feel like there's always room to improve. And, one of the things I've done, kind of going along with the topic tonight, is I've really tried to hone in on the mite control aspect of beekeeping the last couple of years. I initially didn't have a clue. Then I went the treatment-free route, and that didn't work out very well for me at all. And then I started just treating with OAV, specifically the pan type OAV vaporizers. Had no idea, just stuck some in there, probably the dose that was recommended at the time. And I thought I was treating my bees, and I still continue to lose quite a few bees. And in just the last couple of years since I kind of became associated with Cayman Reynolds a little bit more, and his 3-tiered approach of great queens, dead mites, and proper nutrition. And of course, working with these guys right here in the community that we've got in the comments with our I call it the stream team or the hive life movement that we're doing. I've really become intentional, is a word I like to use about my beekeeping, trying to figure out, doing the tests, trying different treatments, seeing the results. And I do have a little over 100 colonies right now. I've been up to about 150 or 160. I still lose some every year, but I'm getting better. And so I'm trying to test before, after, and see the results of the different things, and trying to figure out the best time to use the different treatments. Interestingly, I just posted a video a couple of days ago on, I guess it was Saturday evening, maybe, whatever day it was, about I tried Formic Pro for the first time. And I thought I had tremendous results. Well, I applied it wrong, and I got a lot of comments, and I appreciate the comments in the video. And the next day I did a follow-up video where I had a Tom Nolan from Nod Apiary Products on, and he was able to help walk me through that process, and keeping the paper on the Formic Pro instead of taking it off was what I had done wrong in that first video. It worked great, but I'm glad I didn't kill my bees. And so, but I'm learning, and through that process of posting that second video, I hope I help some folks that may have done the same thing I did. I've had people comment and say, "Oh, I did the same thing," or "I would have done the same thing if I tried that." And so it's just been good. It's really been good to me, and I hope I've been able to help some other folks along the way. But I'm looking forward to this tonight, because I know you're kind of the guru on the oxalic acid front, and know kind of what is effective and what's not. And so I look forward to talking to you tonight and figuring out how I can better use that approach along with the other things I'm doing.
Great. Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, that's, again, going to help paint a much better picture, I think, of for tonight's conversation. Just briefly, if we haven't had a chance to meet, or folks don't know what we're doing here all tonight with a guest like Dr. Cameron Jack, we're the stream team. We're a trio that's been sharing our experience in beekeeping, and we like to bring on folks who have excuse. We like to bring on folks like Dr. Jack to give us a better understanding of the work that they're doing in the beekeeping industry to help us all do better. And it's with these kind of conversations where we can kind of bridge the institute, the scientific, the data-driven side of beekeeping, and marry that with the practical side. Not that, of course, that is what they're doing with the scientific approach. However, a lot of us who are busy in the trenches beekeeping, sometimes we don't take enough time to fully try to understand what all that information is, how it pertains to modern day beekeeping, and how we can actually utilize it in a way to where it can actually push our beekeeping forward. From our own experience, my wife, Susie, and I, we raised 7 kids on the farm where beekeeping is our business. We're not a very large operation, but we sell nukes and queens. This year, we'll probably max out just under 600 colonies or so. We'll sell around 200 nukes and raise anywhere between 1,500 and 2,000 queens. It's a very small scale in the grand scheme of things, but we're able to take our time with it. It's a very hands-on approach with us all. And one of the things that we've discovered, as you grow your beekeeping operations, whether it's Brian, who is a closet sideliner, and he'll be at 50 colonies before he knows it, no matter if he just says 11, he'll be there. Or Bruce, who has a larger sideline operation. He's also growing into that, flirting with that commercial type scale. Or us, where it's selling nukes or queens and supplies here from the farm. One thing you become intimately aware of is bees are the greatest humbler I think I've ever known. And you will find learning opportunities whether you're ready for them or not. And a lot of these lessons are hard lessons learned. I know just over my shoulder here, we just got back from the West Virginia conference where we shared in 2 of our talks a lot of the hard lessons learned and how we grew to this scale from just a few colonies not that long ago. But it was because of getting serious, really taking a detailed approach on our pest management. It wasn't until then before our needle really started to push forward in a big way. So that's when we started taking varroa mites seriously and really doing things to monitor the health of our bees and then make good choices to get the mites down. Then everything kind of changed and our business grew, and it's a big deal. So Cameron, if you would, can you lead the way with this conversation on where you think some of the lost opportunities are with folks as they try to get their head around what mites really mean to them, and what they can do from the most simplest measures to really start to see the health of their bees really, really increase and move their operation, whether it's just backyard, 1 or 2 colonies, or sideline going into commercial with hundreds or thousands. What are some things that folks could keep in mind to start to open their mind up to, hey, we really got to take this mite thing seriously?
Sure. Well, yeah, great question. And with all your introductions and learning kind of more about you, I mean, each one of you kind of touched on how you kind of learned how important it was to actually take an active role in, measuring your mites and or managing them, right? Like, and doing something about it. And that's huge. In fact, I've seen this for years now as I've kind of paid attention and really focused in on varroa control, and I work with a lot of commercial beekeepers in Florida and with just going out and sampling a lot of people's hives and as I go out and sample these colonies, I see the ones who kind of know their mite population. So that would be like point number one that I would say is like, you got to actually know where your colonies are at, right? Like know what those mite populations are. And it's something, I think it's kind of intimidating for new beekeepers. If you're just starting out, and if you've ever seen somebody do an alcohol wash, you might be like, whoa, that's intense, right? Like that looks kind of, you don't need to know a lot about bees to know they probably don't want to be in a jar. And so it's kind of freaks you out a little bit. And, but I promise it's not that bad. I sample colonies all day long and I rarely get stung. It's if you do it right, and there's some good videos out there and people that can show you how to do that. But sampling is really important. Like I said, I work with a lot of commercial beekeepers. There are beekeepers that I know that really, they know what their mite populations are. I can see them at any time, like, hey, where are your mites at? And they'd be like, 1.5, 2 mites per 100 bees. Like if they can tell me where they're at that moment, then I know they're keeping an eye on it. I know that they've got it under control. Kind of like what I think you said. I think Brian, maybe it was you that said, it's about kind of managing mites before they become a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's so critical. If the other, like, point number 2 that I could kind of give to everybody is if you are following point number 1 and you're monitoring like regularly, you actually know what your mites, where your mite loads are at. And then 2, then you can catch it before it becomes a problem, because there becomes a point, the whole, it's really not the mites that are a problem, it's the viruses. But when you have high mite loads in your colony, then you have high virus loads, and that's when your colony comes crashing down. But you might not see that if you're not looking for the mites, and then all of a sudden your bees are really weak and they're just not going to produce and they're just going to fall apart. So step 1, monitor your mites. Step 2, treat your mites before they become a larger problem. And then step 3 is really coming back to step 1, right? Like, keep an eye on it, like check again. And so that's the thing. I feel like I talk to beekeepers all the time and I tell them, oh, you got to monitor your mites. And then, I can see everybody's eyes roll like, oh, okay. Like, right. Like, nobody has time for that. I know I'm going to have to treat. So why don't I just treat and not monitor? But then my biggest counter argument is that you don't actually know if what you're using to treat is actually controlling your mites unless you're keeping an eye on them, right? So like, that's the thing, is like before and after, you've got to do those mite checks before and after treatment. So if you actually were successful in reducing the mites. And I think if I could point to just one single aspect of beekeeping in our modern era of beekeeping, the difference between good beekeepers and bee havers are the ones that actually monitor and treat when they need to, right? It's crucial. And there's lots of we can get into or different treatments if you want, because there's some non-chemical, there's chemical, there's lots of things we could chase, but just boiling it down simply, like those are my steps that I would say are probably the most important right now for you as beekeeping, especially if you're getting new. Start the right way. If you're a new beekeeper, start the right way and learn how to monitor and just do it. Make it a part of your beekeeping practices.
Well, that's a big deal, and I think a lot of folks it takes them a little bit of time. I don't. There might be some beekeeper out there who were just on point in year one and said, you know what, I'm going to treat this beehive or this colony of bees like a unit and like an asset, and I want to protect my asset, and I want to grow this asset, and I want to see a return on this investment. There might be some folks who go about doing it like that, and if so, then it makes sense to monitor the health of this investment and making sure that we're doing all the things that we can do to watch it grow, rather than take a risk on an investment just to see it absolutely dissolve into nothing. I think it takes folks a little while to get, and some folks maybe they never get there because they're looking at these bees a little bit differently. But you brought something up, and I can't help but ask the question because I don't know that there's any answers to, and you might not have an answer to it, and that's okay. And I think getting to the bottom of this without knowing an answer is part of getting to the bottom of it. But just this past weekend, Dr. Robin Underwood spoke at the West Virginia conference, and I got to spend a little bit of time with her on the podcast as well. And I posed the question to her, and I don't know that there's a lot of good answers. So Cameron, hopefully you've got an answer, or you can say, hey, I don't know, we're working on it. But I've got a couple questions. One is you've mentioned about creating that baseline first. Okay, doing a mite wash, a sample ahead of time to say, hey, what is the health of this colony, right? And then we find whatever the threshold is, and then we make a good decision on the time of year, what the goals are for the colony, and choose an appropriate product to help knock down the mites in the colony. But it gets into a very tricky word called threshold.
Yeah, so I knew I was waiting for the threshold. I knew that was the question.
And my question isn't so much as what's the best threshold? Is it a 0.5? Is it a 1? Is it a 2? How far gone are we if we wait until 4? The question, and I a quick background on why I'm asking this question, because I think the why is as important as to the how or the when. We were flirting around with using Dawn Ultra dish soap. It's been years ago now. And in doing so, we had a viewer ask us to take a video on doing an alcohol wash. And at the same time, I thought, if I'm going to take a video to show folks in our audience how we do that, let's just throw in this Dawn dish soap and see what happens. Well, the results were shocking, and it scared the socks out of me just right on this video. And I'm thinking, what in the world is going on? Because at the same time that we're getting like a 2.5 or a 2.7% late fall using 91% rubbing alcohol, when we're using the Dawn, it's 2 and 3 times the amount of mites in the same sample. And where that's a problem, and I don't know, I'm not really sure how to ask this question, but it seems as though if we are setting a threshold, and maybe the question is, are these thresholds actually based on the mite to bee ratio in a colony? And if so, if we're finding a 2% using alcohol, and we're finding 4, 5, and 6% from the same sample of bees using Dawn Ultra, if the threshold indeed is if the goal of the threshold is to find the mite to bee ratio, is it likely that we're waiting way too long to even begin treating our bees, even at a 2%, if 2% is based on rubbing alcohol?
Yeah, that's interesting. So Greg, that's an interesting point that I don't know that anybody's ever explained it to me like that before, because I've done dish soap and I've done alcohol washes just as like a simple comparison. I got similar numbers. I mean, I didn't really get the different. I guess maybe there's difference in technique, and people are doing it, so maybe we can't compare directly like that. But in my mind, like, the whole idea of like the sampling, whether you're doing dish soap, whether you're doing alcohol washes, I mean, it's still a destructive sample, right? You're killing the bees and the mites, and as long as you're shaking, like you got to actually give it some shake, but then you can, I mean, you're just separating the bees and mites. So that's interesting. I guess I hadn't heard about how much of a difference you're getting with Dawn dish soap. But regardless, I mean, kind of going back to your other question, you know, or kind of the main point of your question is, you know, how are we really deriving and like these thresholds, and is it actually representative of like what is happening inside the hive? And that's, I mean, it's a difficult question to ask. You know, when you're thinking of thresholds, there is actually a calculation. I mean, there's ways to calculate the number of mites or of when a threshold becomes, or when a mite pest becomes an issue, right? So this is part of integrated pest management, not just in bees, but like in agriculture in general. I mean, there's a calculation that would be called the economic injury level, and that's part of like you figuring out like your income, and it's like the cost to manage it, like versus the market value of the product and things like that. So there's a bunch of kind of numbers that can go into this, and that's and then you, based on the economic injury level, then you set your threshold kind of below that, so your mite populations don't reach that economic injury level. And so it's difficult, like you said, to know if we're getting, say we're getting 2 mites per 100 bees, like, well, is that really representative of like what's actually happening inside the hive? Well, this is all part, like this is the main issue with sampling, but sampling is essential, because if you really wanted the answer, you would kill every bee in that hive and find every mite, and then you can know. But obviously we're not going to do that, right? Like, so sampling is taking a small snapshot in time and then making your best guess based on that small snapshot, if that makes sense. So like, that's what sampling really is. And so it's difficult. I mean, it's complicated. It's, I guess I can't really answer it, the question either. It's like, because, you know, all you're doing with that alcohol wash or the dish soap, it doesn't, in my mind, doesn't matter so much, as long as they're both reliable. They're both something that you can do to count bees and count mites and to give you a best estimate. And I think that's, to me, that's the most important thing, is that you have some kind of clue that could be reliable. So I guess what I would say, when, or as a follow-up, Greg, just so that I understand a little better, like if you did, when you were doing your samples, I could go back, I'll have to go back and watch your video now, but when you're doing your samples, were you do like from the same hive, you'd collect some 300 bees in a jar, you put rubbing alcohol, then you'd collect another 300 bees, put them in a jar, then you'd put dish soap, and then you got 2 different numbers? Is that? No,
so yeah, so that's a great point, because how we all sample does make a difference. And if we bring up experiences like this, it's important to know, well, how did Greg get the samples where it actually did that? And so just to save you from watching the video right now, to bring it into the conversation, what we did is we took a frame that had some sealed and partially open brood, and we shook those frames off into a pro nuke. Okay. Like two or 3 frames out of the colony. One was all sealed. One was had some open brood, but just a lot of nurse bees. And we shook those off into a pro nuke. Okay. And then we took the pro nuke and we bumped it down and mixed up all those bees into the corner of it. In one of my wash cups, I had the alcohol, and the other cup, I had the Dawn dish soap. I take my scoop, I go right down into the bottom corner of that pro nuke. So it's the same bees, the same sample. 1 scoop into the alcohol, 1 scoop into the Dawn. Both go for like a minute, right? They rest a minute, then we go a minute again, let them rest a minute, and then we're up and we look. And that's where I started freaking out, because one just looked like a sprinkle sundae, and the other one was like, that's not so bad. And where it scared me to death is typically, you know, in the fall time, if I'm like at 2, 2.5%, a couple rounds of Apigard, I'm good to go. Historically has not been a big deal. But when we go from 2.5% to 4.7 or 6%, well, that's a horse of a different color. And that's where my stomach started doing flip-flops, and I started freaking out on the camera and thinking, well, what do we do? I'm thinking through this. I put a plan of action together, and here's where this is a little bit interesting. By no way, shape, or form, we should have one of those disclaimers where it says, the thoughts, views, and expressions of this broadcast does not necessarily represent those of Dr. Cameron Jack or the University of Florida. But that being said, from the practical beekeeping side of this thing, when I'm out there and I'm looking at this situation, knowing that we're in the fall time, and yeah, we do have sealed brood, and there are slowly, we have a heavy Caucasian influence in our stock. They are at that precipice to where they're just going to start slowing down, right, and start cruising into the fall time. Knowing we had those kind of numbers, we had two options. We already had tubs and tubs of Apigard purchased on site, ready to go. We were getting ready to treat with it. With those kind of numbers, I made the decision to go ahead and use oxalic acid to knock down whatever phoretic mites we could right then and there, and then immediately follow up with Apigard. Now, here's where this gets tricky. I'm not recommending folks mix and match chemicals and do what you have to do, but I do want to say this. The colonies that we treated with for the phoretic mites, and we came back every 4 days for 3 intervals while we had Apigard on there, those colonies survived and thrived and came and busted coming out of the springtime. The colonies that I treated like maybe these results are more just like alcohol and at 2%, and I didn't quite get so aggressive, those didn't live. In a separate yard altogether, in the same kind of mite situation, I lost 120 nukes. There were 5-frame singles and 5/5s when I just treated with Apigard. And so we're finding a lot of limitations with where Apigard or many different products do have limitations, can cause absconding. We've even found where oxalic acid can 100% destroy a colony and cause it to abscond. And that's a very niche thing, and we'll talk about that later, I'm sure. So in brief, we took samples from the same exact areas of the frames, the same corner of the pro nuke, and we're getting 2 wild results. Now, this is not just a one-off. We did this in that yard was about 60 colonies. Last year, we kept doing that same comparison, and we kept finding it over and over and over again, that no matter what we do, when we're comparing alcohol versus Dawn, the Dawn is showing more mites. And to me, I'm trying to think, what does that mean? What are thresholds? And automatically my mind goes to, well, is the threshold to begin treating for mites? Like a lot of folks are using 2%. Let's just say that if there was a industry standard of 2%, which I'm not saying there is, but if folks start at 2%, where does this number even come from as far as this threshold goes? My mind went to, well, it's got to be the mite to bee ratio. And as the bees grow exponentially, anything past this 2% curve starts to get out of hand, and we had that negative repercussion and financial loss in the colony. But if it truly is a mite versus bee threshold, how do we explain Dawn? And if Dawn is getting twice as many mites in it, that's a big problem.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, you're giving me a lot to work on now. This is the beautiful thing of science, is like when we start talking, I mean, then new ideas are coming. So this seems like something that we just got to do a large scale head-to-head test and see what we can get, because that's interesting. So and honestly, Greg, like I think I think again, it's great like that. Like when you're monitoring and you have an idea of like what's going on. I mean, it might be freaky to look and see, like I did 2 different sampling techniques and I got 2 separate results, but at the same time, both are telling you, I got some mites in my colony. I got to do something about it. So, so like, I mean, that's kind of where it goes. And when you were talking about your treatment, we just finished a pretty big study. There was a team of researchers here at UF, so it just certainly wasn't just me. There was a lot of people involved, but we did basically a seasonal efficacy trial. Like, so we were trying different products out at different times of the year. And we saw that just because something like maybe just because Apivar worked really good for you in the spring, it's not necessarily going to work well for you in the fall. Just because Apiguard worked really well for you in the fall doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work well for you in the summer or spring or, you know, winter. You know, we tested 8 different treatments, and it was just incredible to see. We haven't been able to publish that work yet. It's coming. We hope that it'll come out this summer. Then we'll be able to spread it around and make sure as many people that want to see it. But yeah, I mean, that's why it's just important that you're keeping an eye on what's going on, because just because something worked for you one time does not mean it's going to work for you the next time. And you had mentioned like the combination of treatments, you know, that I think is going to become more and more of a factor. If I, you know, was looking at my crystal ball and making some kind of predictions, I think it's part of my job is I'm looking for new chemical active ingredients for new products in the future, but that's going to take time. And it's even if I find something that's a hit, now I've got to convince a chemical company to pick it up and turn it into a product, right? And that's millions of dollars worth of investment for them, and they might not be willing to do it. So there's some risk kind of involved in there. So I think what I'm saying is that I think better utilization of the products that currently exist are going to become more and more important as we, you know, as time goes on and as we are figuring out how to better deal with Varroa. So what you said is like knocking down the phoretic mites with OA. Great. Now you're quickly cleaning it up with another treatment. I think that's going to become more of a strategy that people are going to have to start adopting soon. And there's a lot of work to figure that out. Basically, everything we use as a chemical treatment that's toxic to the mite is also toxic to the bee at certain levels. So it's about finding that balance. You don't want to be throwing in something over and over or at too high of a dose. So like you said, with Apiguard, you could drive them out straight out of the hive, or you could burn up your brood. It could be pretty rough. So it's a balance game too. So a lot to unpack and figure out.
So I got a quick question. Something that I think is so confusing to people is, for example, there was a question earlier on here about if you have a reasonable mite load, like in the early spring, like right now, you know, should go ahead and treat to knock them down before summer so they don't spike in the summertime. It's confusing to know when to test, when to treat, when to do this. So as you go through your colonies, as you do your tests, do you just kind of in anticipation of a spike in the summer, should you just go ahead and put something on them now? What would you recommend? And how often should you treat? How often should you check to treat? Just kind of what should be a timeline? I know it varies in different parts of the world, but if you could give, you know, kind of a blanket answer, the best you could for everyone from, you know, beginning hobby beekeepers on up to the larger beekeepers, what would be kind of a good rule of thumb for how to determine when to test, when to treat, and how to figure out kind of a schedule, I guess you would say?
Yeah, great question, Bruce, and whoever asked that question online, great job. So I would say if I was kind of speaking in general, you know, I'm in Florida, so you know, Brian and Greg, you're up in Ohio. Your bees your situation is very different than like Bruce and I, like down in the South, right? So for us, like I've already made splits. I mean, we've already had some swarms that we didn't, you know, properly control, you know, things like that, that we're dealing with a different kind of situation. So it's going to be different, what I would recommend, I guess, for everybody. But so you're going to have to kind of tailor this response to your own situation. But I think it's really important to keep an eye on the mite populations. I would say even monthly, like during the production season, like during the time where your bees are booming. For us in Florida, that's been since February, and it doesn't really end until like July. Like in our bees, we had a colony that swarmed in December this year, which was really frustrating to me. This is one of the hard parts of being in Florida. There's good and bad. But that's one of the bad. It's like my bees just want to swarm all the time. And so we're constantly keeping an eye on the mites at that point. And so to your to that question, you know, when are you going to actually apply some kind of a treatment? If is it at 2 mites, or is it 2 mites per 100 bees, or is it before then? You might as well treat now. So I'd say a lot of that's going to depend on what you want to use too, right? If you are planning on doing some kind of like non-chemical treatment, which I think there are some options, right? Like drone comb removal, like so drone trapping, right? Where you might have you're basically creating a lot of drones. Maybe use a drone comb foundation, or maybe you just kind of have a medium frame and a deep super, and they kind of draw out, and then you're letting those drones kind of get capped, and you're taking them out of the hive. You know, that can actually be really effective if the planets align, and you know, your colony actually wants to make a lot of drones. So I mean, there's some things that would have to happen to make that really work well. But my point is some treatments you would have to apply them at a really low threshold, maybe like 1 mites per 100 bee, because that is not, it's at best it's going to give you like 50% reduction in your mites, where so you want to keep doing those kind of small treatments kind of at low thresholds to prevent them from reaching the high threshold. And then where other times, in a pinch, you're like, well, my mite populations are high, I got to drop them quick, I'm going to use this chemical. And so I don't know if I'd give anybody like a specific treatment regimen, right? But I'll tell you what I'm personally, as Cameron Jack, like what I'm using on my bees primarily is I rotate between ApiGuard and Formic Pro, or some kind of Formic treatment like Mite Away Quick Strips or Formic Pro. And I'm kind of doing that in the spring, kind of spring treatments. For us, it's in Florida, it's just going to get too hot for really for those two chemicals that are really volatile and really intense. I'm really limited. It's kind of just a few months of the year that I could actually apply those and not hurt my bees. And so then in other times of the year, kind of later in the fall, I'm using kind of multiple rounds of oxalic acid or Apivar strips, trying to knock them down. And then in the winter, I probably use oxalic acid again. And so I'm kind of, that's kind of like some of my typical rotation. But again, I mean, it's going to be different for everybody. And it's about, I know that just one round of oxalic acid, for instance, is not going to reduce my mites to a really significant level. So I'm going to have to keep going back and back and back. So I'm planning those types of treatments based on where those mite thresholds are, and based on like my management. Like if I know I've got a big nectar flow coming, then I'm going to probably get my bees cleaned up so they're nice and strong for that, and I'm not running into any treatment issues while I got a nectar flow. So there's definitely a balance game and planning.
Kind of follow up to that though. Say for example, and I think this might be able to, we might be able to apply this anywhere where there are seasons. Obviously, if you don't have seasons, it's just a continuous thing, and the further south you get, the more it is like that. But even here in Alabama, we have a short winter. We do have somewhat, they don't go completely broodless, but they come close. And so I guess the question and that question I asked earlier was from Grammy's midwife on here, Lisa. She lives just north of me here. And I guess the question I would have as far as testing goes is, and this could apply from like Alaska, I think, all the way down. When should you test? Like obviously in the wintertime for folks like up in Ohio, up north, they can't test in the middle of the winter. So you start testing when you start to see when the bees start to fly, when you see brood, when it's warm enough to get into them. Should you test almost immediately and see where your threshold is? And then of course, if you have a problem, address it. And then another quick follow-up is, if it is right at the threshold, a little bit below, would you recommend going ahead and treating and knocking them down? Just because the thing we have here is we're like you guys. It gets so hot in the summertime, you can't use the treatments that you can use with honey on the hives. It's got to be the Apivar or something else that you're not supposed to use with honey on the colony. And so would you recommend maybe just going ahead and hitting whatever you have and making sure they're low, going into that honey flow, like you mentioned before, just knocking them way down, just being as clean as you can possibly be before you stack the honey supers on? Kind of, how would you do that? Would you start testing just kind of a?
Yeah, sure. So you asked, like, would I start testing like in the spring once my bees are just now starting flying, kind of coming out of winter? Yeah, that's exactly what I would test. I mean, that's right when I would start looking. And then, as like I said, I mentioned I would probably keep an eye on them as much as like monthly during the main production season. And so maybe in your area, early spring, you check them right as they're coming out of winter, and then you see like, okay, well, actually, I think I can go a little bit longer. Let them build up, because all these treatments that you do, or at least all chemical treatments, they're not super easy on these bees, right? Like any treatment that you're doing is coming at some level of like sacrifice to that colony. So you might decide, okay, well, the mite populations are a little bit lower, like maybe they're at 1 mite per 100 bee or less. Then I probably give them a little bit of time to allow them to build up a bit in the spring. But then you got to be checking. So then next month I look, oh, I'm already at 2 mites per 100 bees. Now I got to get on them. So I mean, I guess I sound like a broken record. I'm just saying.
It's perfect. You did perfect with that. Sure.
What led me to have my great failure, and it was that humbling moment. Prior to when I used oxalic acid the first time, I would always use like Apivar, and then when the weather was cooperating, I would use Formic. And I decided to move into the direction of oxalic acid, and it was just the talk of everybody, OAV. So I got a vaporizer, and I did, 1 treatment a week for 3 weeks. And a couple years ago, that's what was recommended. And the failure, where I failed was I did not test. I just thought I'm using this magic, oxalic acid, and it's almost like, and in my head, I'm thinking, I'm going to wave this wand. I'm going to walk over and vaporize these mites, and I am going to have the healthiest colonies in Northeast Ohio. And I did not test. Had I tested, I would have known that my colonies were still polluted with Varroa. So that's where, testing is just so key. And also, just to go along, and I've seen in the chat, a couple folks have asked about using different treatments. And one of, that's what led me as far as like with my IPM is certain times of the year I have in my head, that's when I'm going to use certain products. Just like I'm an Apivar fan, so I can get that on here early before things start really going nuts. I can give them their, 40 some day treatment and pull that off. And, if everything works, as it should, then I'll be going into this, initial flow and hopefully have those strong colonies. If they need it, I have the oxalic acid that, I hit them with, but, I don't, whenever I use my oxalic acid anymore, it's multiple treatments. Last year, I think I think it was 6 treatments. I was every 4 or 5 days, and I would go out and hit them. And my mite counts were very low. But over the course of the year, I think between the Apivar, they got Apivar twice, they got oxalic acid twice, and then in December, I hit them just with a treatment in the middle of December just to get the phoretic. But it's work, Yeah. But with that work, though, you end up maintaining colonies. I can't preach enough, and I'm just, I'm such a newbie, really, just going into my 7th season. But keeping an eye on those mite counts is just so crucial. It's just so critical, you know. And it also dictates really, you know, like what Greg's saying, you know, and Bruce, what treatments are we going to use? You know, if really you just, you know, you can get away with an apivar where it's you know, well over a month-long treatment, you know, go ahead and do that. Or if you need to really, you know, hit them with a punch, you know, you're going to change up and go into a different direction. So, you know, the value of monitoring Varroa, it's just, I cannot preach it enough.
Yeah. Well, you've got, I mean, you're a success story, Brian. You said you got 100% survival at least this point, you know. See, I mean, you made some changes and you fixed it. That's what life's about.
Yeah. And it is, you know, we take those moments and you have to look at it, step back, analyze the whole situation, you know, well, where did I fail? But it's really not a failure, because from that I was able to grow, you know, and you know, it's we always have to look at those situations and, you know, take them as a learning moment. So, but just monitoring Varroa, it's just, oh my gosh, you know, anybody when they're new, you know, that's one of the things that I always preach.
Yeah. Well, if you all don't mind, I mean, maybe I can take us in a little direction based on what Brian said. You know, you'd mentioned your OA vapor treatment that you kind of hit, like, you know, regularly, like 4 or 5 treatments, and then you came back and you still didn't really, I mean, your colonies died because you didn't really control those mites all the way. You know, one thing that we've been finding, and it's not just our lab now, I mean, we published something a few years ago, and then a few other people have started publishing and noticing the same thing, is just the current labeled rate for oxalic acid vaporization is just too low. I mean, it really just does not work. Yeah. And so it's something that I'll say that there's a group of researchers and beekeepers kind of out there that are pushing and advocating hard for that label to be changed to make it more effective. Because I mean, to me, actually, the label is the law. It's important because the label represents research. And in this case, I think the label was just mislabeled and doesn't represent accurately the reality that 1 gram of oxalic acid per brood chamber is just not enough. But so I do think, I guess I'm happy saying that there are people working on, including myself, with a group of other researchers that are now working with the registration, the registrant, the ones who own the registration for apabioxal, you know, along with the EPA to change that. And I think that change is coming soon. I'm hopeful as early as this year. But I've learned that things with the federal government don't move incredibly quickly. But it seems like that is potentially, you know, a good, I think, a little win, something that seems like it will change in the future and to make it more effective for beekeepers.
That's a good point, because I'll choose my words, I guess is a better way to put this, is if we as beekeepers, or no matter what livestock we're husbands to, if we wait around for the label to tell us how to use the product, and I don't mean any disrespect by this, a lot of times it's too late. Our colonies are dead. We can't absorb that financial loss. One thing that absolutely fires me up to no end is when we want to talk about sustainable this and sustainable that, sustainable farming, sustainable agriculture, sustainable beekeeping. We want to talk about the physical sustainable part about that, but everyone gets squirmish and freaks out when we talk about the financial sustainability of operating a business and finding the lines here. We have to read between the lines an awful lot of times, and if we wait around for the label to tell us it's okay and we have the government's blessing to do that, well, I don't mean anything by it, but it's too late. If we would have sat around and waited for oxalic acid to be legal at the low dose of 1 gram, no one, how many thousands and thousands and thousands of colonies likely would have already perished from that. That it's so frustrating to try to be a practical beekeeper and wait around for best practice and guidance, and it feels like it's a day late and a dollar short. Cameron, what can we do from the practical beekeeper side to both respect um, everything that you guys are doing on your end to get the research done, to put it out in front so we can have at least a point of reference or a guideline? Maybe it makes it eventually to a label law, but maybe I'd like to talk about what can we do from the practical side of beekeeping and the scientific side at the same time, to where we're getting the best and highest result for our bees every single year.
Yeah, good question. So, I think one thing that kind of unifies beekeepers really around the world, I mean, I just the type of personality that our beekeepers is, we kind of are all tinkerers, right? Like, and we like to problem solve and figure things out, so I mean, nothing that I do is rocket science, right? Like, I mean, my whole treatment, like my research is like applying things, measuring how it's affecting colonies, taking good notes, and like monitoring, right? Like, so I can make those comparisons. This is all stuff that beekeepers can do. I get a lot of emails, I'll say, from beekeepers around the world that have basically solved it, right? Like, they figured it out. Like, all we got to do is this, right? Like, it's super easy. I don't know why you didn't try this. And it's like, that's great, but you got to show me some data. One of my favorite sayings is, "In God we trust, all others need to bring data," right? So like, I think one way that we can kind of like unify together to make a stronger argument as to the efficacy of treatments, and basically just share each other's information, is to collect data and be open and share it. Like, I think, that's one thing that just as a beekeeping community we could potentially do. Potentially we could make changes so much faster if we were saying, like, if beekeepers, so in 2015 is when the EPA had the emergency use permit for oxalic acid. Well, it wasn't, in 2015, there's probably a bunch of beekeepers that immediately tried oxalic acid vaporization at the legal rate, and they're like, "Hey, that didn't work. I'm not doing that again." And then they just didn't do anything, or like they didn't do it again. And then, that information wasn't really out there, wasn't really known. And then eventually, like, it caught up, and everybody's talking about, "Oh yeah, this doesn't really work at this label rate." But if people had data to say, "Look at this, it doesn't work," then all of a sudden there's a story. There's not just people ranting about, ranting about their problems. They're like, "Look, this does not work. I have specific measurements to show it." And then, that's something immediately before even a university. I mean, I work as a researcher at a university, and I am totally aware and can admit that sometimes the process can be slow, because any research that I'm going to do relies on time and money. Like, I have to have money. I have to have people to help me do this research. And then by the time that I've done that, and now I've putting it together to publish, it's been 2 years. And like you said, if this is your livelihood, you don't have that time, like, right? And so I think one way we could speed up the process is to actually collect good data together that we can better utilize and inform the research quickly. And then, hopefully, like, if enough beekeepers are screaming at the EPA, like, "This does not work. Look at this. We've got all this data that shows it doesn't work," then, that can really speed up a process rather than waiting for everybody else to kind of get on board. So I don't know if I answered your question, Greg. I guess that's maybe me kind of getting on my ranting.
Well, I don't know that there's necessarily an answer, and I think that's why folks like me, and I'm sure at times yourself and Bruce and Brian, get absolutely frustrated with where we are with things, because if we are trying to do the best we can for our bees and keep them happy, healthy, and alive for not only the physical sustainability of the life form that we're taking responsibility for, but if it's for a business and we have to be financially sustainable and we have an investment that we have to maintain, if we feel like our hands are tied and we can't do steps A, B, and C, or treatment or method A, B, and C, because there isn't a label or enough data to show it, but yet people on the fringe are using it and are finding success, there's a fine line there between what we do, how we go about it, based on what is working, what we think is working, and what the data is telling us is working for somebody in some study in some place with some. It gets very tricky. So I think a lot of us beekeepers on the practical end, it- we don't forsake or shun the science at all. We want that information more than anybody, because we want to be able to make good solid choices for our bees. We want to use products that we're not going to waste money or time or hurt our bees or cause any kind of synergistic problems with. We just need things that work. And unfortunately with varroa mites, it seems like, it's a goalpost that is constantly moving and moving and moving and moving. Oxalic acid, not approved, no label. Okay, great. Now it's 1 gram. Okay, it's not working. And you find everyone's using anywhere from 2 to 5 grams, and now we're getting results. But hey, newsflash, there's the label doesn't say to do that, so you're operating outside of the league. I mean, come on, it gets to be, it's such a, it's so frustrating, and I don't want to keep going down that rabbit hole, because I told my wife I wouldn't get fired up tonight. But
Sorry,
it's just
sorry to
one of
make
those
your blood
things.
boil.
It's
Yeah.
just one of the, how do we, moving forward from this, Bruce, Brian, Cameron, what can we do to help speed up this process? What can we do to continue to work on these things together, without that? I mean, let's face it, there's enough us and them divide on every other aspect out there in agriculture, and especially with beekeeping. What are some things you guys think, any ideas on what we can do to kind of bridge some of these gaps so we can work a little more closely together, just to get good, solid methods and information out there and trade back and forth? You guys have any ideas?
Man, I mean, the first thing that pops into my head is some type of a system where we can more or less information sharing, and where we do have, well, you have those that are working in the lab, and then those of us that are out, we are in the field, and we could say, well, here's what my wash was, here's the treatment that I used with this amount of oxalic acid, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever. And, afterwards, this is what I found, and if there was a type of reporting system, and even where you can report anonymously, just because me personally, I don't know whether I would want to throw my name into a report and say, hey, I used 4 grams, per brood box, and I had wonderful results, where it's a system that, well, you're going to look and say, well, Brian up there in Ohio isn't really following the law, so let's pay him a visit, but part of, just for part of research, maybe some type of a program where beekeepers all across America could share that information and just upload, and even if it would require photos, well, that's easy, lay out on a paper towel or whatever it is, here's my sample, here's the varroa, here's the treatment that I used. And that way we have, shared from all across the United States, all of these field results. Maybe that's a system that we could look into.
Some citizen science, at least best practices to help put that information out there. Bruce, what about you? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think this is one of the big dilemmas that is not just beekeeping. I think it probably covers all kinds of different things and any type of farming, where you have people that figure out kind of what works, and it's worked for them, and it may work for them, has been for a long time, and they're on the quote unquote cutting edge of technology. They figured things out. They know how to keep their bees alive. but they're hesitant to share those successful practices because, they might be living a little bit on the edge type of a thing. And so it's one of those things. It is very difficult, but I think those are kind of some of the barriers that are trying to be broken down right now by the kind of the new wave that's coming through beekeeping with the hive life type attitude, and I guess you guys over in West Virginia had kind of a similar type conference this weekend where people are just sharing ideas and trying to figure out what works. As far as the legality of things, I mean, it's like you say, it is very frustrating. I just try things, and if they work, fine. If they don't, then I don't try them. And if I feel like it's going to hurt my bees, I'm not going to do it. And that's just the bottom line. And so, but we got to be careful. It's the thing. You got to be careful. I know, Dr. Jack, you've got to be super careful in your position with what you're doing, because you have to pretty much go by the label. You can test things and do studies, but you cannot recommend, I understand, doing something that's off label, but you kind of know what works, and you're learning that. And that's kind of why you're so important, you and the other universities that are doing this type of studies, as well as those other people who may not be a university who are approved to do some scientific studies. I know Cayman has a test yard that he's doing. I know that, we've got people like Randy Oliver and different people that are doing testing and studies and research outside of universities. And so there's a lot of people trying to figure it out. But the difficult thing, once again, is how do you get it to be legal? How do you get it to where you don't have to feel guilty when you do it, type of a thing? As far as oxalic acid goes, I thought those little blue cups, or those little blue cups that we used I thought they were 1 or 2 grams, but they're 5 grams. And so I was hitting my bees with, for like 2 years, I'm hitting them with like 5 or even 7 grams per, basically per box. If it was 2 boxes, I'd stack that thing up as deep as I could. 1 box, I just did it level. So it's working, but it's because I'm using more of a dose than the recommended label, though I thought I was using the label dose. And then Greg sends me this picture back in just a few months ago on a scale that it's 5 grams in that little thing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. I was confused, doing it wrong, thought I was doing it right.
Bruce the overdoser. How dare you?
I know, man. It's just, and the bees just seem to thrive when you do it that way. So it's a dilemma for everybody, I think. And, I know that a lot of commercial guys just do what works. And that's just how it is. They just do what works. And I think we need to be careful about judging other people. There's a lot of that thrown around.
Yeah.
And that's something I have no tolerance for in my personal, there's a couple things I can't stand. It's one thing in particular, probably one of the biggest things I would bring up here is the holier than thou attitude. I'm better than you attitude. Anyone that feels like they've got it all figured out, I'm going to run as fast as I can the opposite direction from you. Just get away from me, because that's just not how you need to be. Once you've got it all figured out, then that's when your learning stops. And I'm not about those kind of people. So, I'm just always trying to grow and learn. And I think everybody should be until the day they die. And so that's kind of how I am. And I'm open to trying different things, but it is difficult, Greg. That is a great question that you brought up there. I'm not sure what the real answer is, but I'm just going to try things that work and then see what happens.
Cameron, what are your thoughts here on the dichotomy of the scientific and practical, each doing their seemingly separate things, but we're all kind of unified more than we know? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, like you said, Greg, I really do think we're more unified than you think. Like you said, Bruce, as a university employee that works for a land grant institution, and I'm talking to farmers and to beekeepers and growers and things, and I've got to stick with the label because that's the law, and I work for the state. I can't go against the law. Mm-hmm. That said, what I think we're doing, what kind of right now, what the original question was, Greg, was like, how do we better communicate? How do we better inform one another and things? I mean, that's what this is. And Brian, you talked about kind of that citizen science idea. I think that's fantastic. And in other areas of research, they really utilize citizen science. I mean, so much better than what we do in this world of apiculture. I mean, I just don't see it. Other than like a few small examples of some like larger varroa monitoring type projects. You know, I don't see that kind of real citizen science collective where people are getting together and sharing information kind of in a judgment-free zone of like, here's what we're doing, here's what's working, here's what's not working. I think that can and should be a big part of this. So, you know, I want to, I would never want anybody to look at me as like a university employee and be like, oh, well, don't tell Cameron like what we're doing in our hives, because like I'm not regulatory. Like I don't really care. I mean, like in fact, I want to learn what people are doing that works. Now, I mean, again, I'm not going to then go and say, hey, everybody, Greg says we should do this. And this is, you know, I'm not going to do that because I'm a mouthpiece for the university. I'm not going to tell people, but don't feel like anybody needs to hide anything from researchers. Like I want to know so I can test, so I can collect some more data, so we can do more. I mean, that's what helps with the communication. And when there is that barrier between maybe what commercial beekeepers and like honeybee researchers are doing, if there's that barrier, we're going to just keep, we're not going to make progress. And I mean, I don't want
I enjoyed your interview with David Burns recently, that he kind of, and I'm not sure, I watched it, correct me if I misinterpreted it, but he kind of came at you like almost like oxalic acid vapor isn't effective. And you said, well, at the labeled dose, it's not. But what we found is, boom.
Right.
And so that basically what you can do there is you're citing studies without recommending it. And so I thought that was very interesting, the way you handled that. And it was a short interview. I think you and David both did a great job with that, to where, maybe it's not effective at 1 gram per box, but we have found that it can be effective at this, up to this amount. And so you you did a great job of explaining kind of what's working, what you've seen work, without recommending the product. And so I think that's kind of one way around it, you know, that you can kind of, this is because, like you say, you're not a regulatory board, you're a researcher. Right. So, you know, if those studies have been published and if you're allowed to talk about it, you can say what you found in your studies.
I'm not going to do any research that I can't publish. Like, I mean, that's right. It's a waste of my time. It's a waste of everybody's time. Anything that I do, it's going to be published. But so you're right. Like Bruce, it's about being transparent. It's like about sharing, you know, right now the label rate is not working. However, we have found that at 4 grams, we're killing a lot of mites, and we're clean. We had, we haven't published this. This is coming out hopefully later this year too. But we can, we can get, or we had a colony that was severely infested. We had about 10 mites per 100 bees, and we brought them back and we saved them by treating, you know, at this level. And so, you know, I'm fine to tell people anything that I do, any of my research. I'm an open book. I'm going to tell you it all. And then now we use the data to go try to convince others that this is good, this is important. And so yeah, it takes, unfortunately, great. I mean, it does take some time to kind of go through that process, but it's, I feel it too. I mean, I understand, like, time is money, and it's
100% transparency. So, and I will say, anyone watching, do not do what I do. What I do is in my apiary. I'm responsible for my colonies. I'm not responsible for yours. What worked in my apiary, and we just discussed the blue caps. I had 1 blue cap per brood box. And that is what I found has worked exceptionally well. So it's not recommended, but that worked exceptionally well. And now I have, you know, from changing up what I was doing, and it, you know, following the label is where, you know, I had my failure 2 years ago, to now I've got these healthy colonies now, and that's just one. I'm not saying that that's the only reason why they're living. I also did several other things to change up my beekeeping, but it's a piece of the puzzle.
I've got a quick question with the OAV. Rob Pollock has the new INSTANTVAP vaporizer that just shoots it in incredibly fast, incredibly powerful, an amazing unit. The maximum dose on that is 4 grams, but it shoots it in with such intensity. Do you believe there is any difference in the I guess how quickly it fills the colony and fogs, vaporizes the colony as a result? Compare that to the wand type, the little pan type, where it slowly, vaporizes the colony, as opposed to one that just shoots it in and just fogs it almost instantly. Do you think there's a difference? For example, like if you've got one where you're maybe, and we're going into these numbers here, like say 4 grams per box, 4 or 5 grams per box with a standard type vaporizer, or if you use his that's more powerful, shoots it in faster, do you think that makes a difference? Maybe 2 or 3 grams would do the job, or do you think it's the amount of the vapor as opposed to the speed with which it is entered into the hive?
Yeah, this is a good point, Bruce. I don't know that the speed at which it's going into the hive makes a difference as much as the amount does. But one thing that's important to think about that I think really hasn't been researched well, at least not that I'm familiar with, is the actual temperature that we're using. So I think that speed of it, vaporizing quickly is due to the temperature. If you are like those old wand ones, the ones that you were talking about, those pan ones, you do kind of see it bubble. If you pull it out too early or something, it's bubbling and boiling and it's really slow. And that's why it's a pain in the neck and nobody wants to use those. You'd rather use something that's like, bam, just going to get them quick. But what we don't know, oxalic acid does combust, right? Like it does it. If we are cooking it too fast and bam, it is combusted into something else, not oxalic acid anymore. Now, so I think there's some research that's got to be done too, related to the temperature at which we are vaporizing to try to help us make it more effective. Because then maybe we could potentially go at a lower dose and maybe balance out this one is really fast, but it combusts and it's not very effective, versus this one's a little bit slower, but you're getting more of the oxalic acid the oxalic acid structure intact, and so it's now more effective. I think that's an area of research that I'd like to explore, but as I already said, I'm limited by time and money, right?
Yeah.
I get Grant to kind of do some of that work, but it's on my list of something that I really want to do. And because like I said, I think in the end, it's really important that we look for new treatments, but that process is a slow process. And so it's also important that simultaneously we're working at making the products that we already have more effective.
Cameron, have you found a rate at which oxalic acid is detrimental to the honeybee?
Yeah, good question. So I actually, when I first was doing my dose project, I chose 4 grams thinking that was going to be the detrimental dose. And then we're like, oh, it didn't hurt the bees at all. And the colony looked great. And so after applying it once a week, we even applied for one project that I haven't published yet, but it's coming out soon. It's we were looking at different time intervals between treatments of 4 grams, and had treated every 3 days, every 5 days, or every 7 days. And I thought, okay, for sure, 4 applications of 4 grams every 3 days was just going to tear up our bees. And it didn't. It actually was not as effective at controlling mites as waiting every 5 to 7 day intervals, but it didn't really tear up our bees. So to answer your question, Greg, no, not yet. I have not really found that upper threshold. And I think it is actually important to find that upper threshold of when it's really going to start hurting your bees. Not because I want to hurt bees, but because I want to prevent others from
doing it,
pushing that and knowing what that boundary is, so people aren't throwing just endless amounts of oxalic acid and really burning up their bees.
I did find that threshold.
You do.
on accident. I'll share that with you. I gave instructions for some fellows to go out, and I've told Bruce and Brian and our audience this before. I'll share it with you. I gave some instructions to go out to treat our colonies with oxalic acid using the blue cups, which are 5 grams. Typically, now, of course, again, the thoughts and views and expressions of this broadcast does not necessarily reflect those of Cameron Jack or the University of Florida.
I appreciate that. Way to go.
So 5 grams is what we use. It's effective for us. Those blue caps, primarily, it's fast, it's easy. You level off the blue cap, you go to town. It's just, it's the same. It's creating consistency, consistent results, consistent amount. And so for us, that was important, no matter how outside of whatever. And to be honest, not a lot of us are spending time trying to figure out, well, what is the current rate of oxalic acid this week or this month or this year? That being said, when we raise queens, we raise a lot of them in 10 frame boxes that are split into 3. So we'll have 3 colonies in a 10 frame box. So I gave the instructions to go out and give all of our colonies a blue cap. Well, they did exactly what I asked.
So 15 grams.
Well, 15 grams. Okay. But here's a bud weight. There's more. In each division in that box. So in 3 compartments, there was only 1 frame of bees per compartment. And so we gave 5 grams of oxalic acid to 1 frame of bees. Now, had that been, let's say, a 3 or a 5 frame nuke box, and they would have received 5 grams, they might have been okay. But when we give 15 grams to the overall 10 frame single box, now you have 3 frames of bees that are sharing 15 grams throughout that. Now, of course, the box that they have dividers, there's a screen inner cover on top and a lid, but it's still going to penetrate and get into all those areas. And what we found is that either absolutely ran whatever was left in the bees right out of the colony, but it was the first time that I actually seen any kind of queen mortality. And the queens were just covered in just acid crystals, and they were just, I hate to use the word wigging out, but they were just, you could just tell they had too much of something all at once, and they just weren't right. Now, to be fair, these are mating colonies. And so we had a lot of very young, fresh queens. And several of these colonies, they hadn't even gone on a mating flight yet. So they were pretty young in their development process. Now, that yard is a very limited yard. I don't know how many colonies of bees you guys typically do to formally base an opinion or a conclusion on your studies. This was a yard of about would have been divisible by 3s. So this one I think was either 36 or 45 individual compartments, and every single one of them was bad news. Now, get out into a 5 frame box where there's 2 or 3 frames of bees, there was zero, never have had a single problem. So I feel like for me, knowing when you push the boundary and say, okay, what is too much? 5 grams for 1 frame of bees, it's very likely too much.
Hey, you got an answer there, man. That's a learning experience, and now we're all benefiting from that, right? So that's that's interesting. I mean, you probably heard like the dose makes the poison, right? Like it's all about if you got 1 frame, that's a lot coming in where all of those bees are picking up so much, and there's nowhere for it to go except on that very limited amount of space in there. So yeah, there you go. There's an answer for you.
We had zero mite washes.
Yeah, those bees were probably squeaky clean.
But there wasn't any bees in the wash either, so it was kind of a wash, literally. But could you speak to what exactly, a lot of us are so confused with so many things, and we hear information and we're like, okay, well, I guess this is the most current. Let's just do this and hope that it's killing these mites in a certain way. Could you speak at all to what is it exactly that oxalic acid is doing to the mites? And to take that one step further is if the mites came from Asia and the mites are living on the honeybees, do the mites occur or exist in anywhere else other than Apis mellifera? And what is oxalic actually doing to the mites to remove them from the equation inside of a colony?
Yeah, so let me start with that part. What does oxalic acid actually do to the mites? The short and sweet of it is actually we're not entirely sure, and it's a frustrating answer, but it's difficult to answer that question. I'll tell you why in just a second. But so here's what we kind of do know that it potentially work. I mean, we do know that at least when you vaporize, it's coating all the inside of that hive. I mean, it's getting on all over the bees. It's grooming, it elicits a grooming response. So the bees are now grooming themselves. They're more likely to knock off some mites. The mites basically have suction cup feet, right? Like, so if there's oxalic acid everywhere and it's gunking up their feet or cutting into their feet, like they can't really hold on, they're going to come off again. But even still, not just that physicalness, like if I tape a mite down to my lab bench and I carefully put a small drop of oxalic acid on, it's going to kill it. Like there is something molecular, like at a molecular level, that is happening to that mite. And at this point, we still don't really know what that is. That's also been on my wish list of oxalic acid research that I haven't been able to get funding for successfully to find the answer to that question. But so the other part of your question is, where are these other mites? Or like, and does oxalic acid work on that, or like what's the effect there? So I mean, Varroa come from Apis cerana, the Asian honeybee, right? So that's how the Apis mellifera got them in the first place, is that once we started moving Apis mellifera into parts of Asia, right, that where it wasn't there previously, those you start overlapping your geographic areas, and then you're sharing pests and pathogens back and forth. And so for Apis cerana, Varroa is not an issue. In fact, this summer I was in Thailand doing research, and also, I mean, I was leading a study abroad class there, and I got to meet and talk to and see a lot of Apis cerana colonies and their beekeepers. And I mean, they don't do anything for Varroa. They don't have to. Those bees have evolved. The bees and Varroa have evolved together to a point where they've balanced each other out. It's not an issue. And there are some things that those bees do so much better than our bees do. I mean, if you watch an Apis cerana bee that has a Varroa on its back, it will not stop. It will not quit for a second until that mite is off and it is chewed it up, right? Like they are just absolutely go bonkers until that mite is dead. And so you don't find Varroa on the Apis cerana workers. You find them on drones, the Apis cerana drones, and they can only really reproduce inside the drone cells, not the worker cells. And we don't fully understand the exact reason why that is, but I mean, they seem to kind of have this figured out and balanced together. So the beekeepers in Asia that are keeping Apis mellifera, they need to treat. The beekeepers that are working with Apis cerana, they're not doing anything for Varroa. Now they've also, a lot of them, at least in Thailand, they have those tropy mites that you've heard Sam talk about forever. And so they do have to do something, because it will kill because that mite is actually from a different bee, Apis dorsata, and is now somewhat recently been introduced to Apis cerana. So it's when we're sharing like bees in overlapping areas, that's kind of seems like to be causing some problems here. That's just the globalization of the world. I mean, that's just how it is now. I'm sorry if I got down.
No. We should just rename this podcast The Rabbit Hole, because that's what we do best, I think, is we'll start just thinking about things. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, okay, well, it's simple and it's complicated. It's simply complicated. But right, if we're all doing what we can, let's say in an ideal situation, an ideal banner a year, right? And we're able to monitor our colonies, right? And if we've got several out yards, we're taking samples from, I don't know, 10 to 20% of our colonies, and we're kind of documenting our journey with the mites, and we're watching them slowly creep up, and we intervene, whether it's to keep them static with OA throughout the times of brood until it's the right timing to get in there and zap them with something else to penetrate the cappings and knock the mites out of the equation. And we're cruising into late fall, and now we're back down to zeros or ones or very little, and we wait until solstice and we zap them with oxalic acid, and then we repeat that every third or fourth day for 2 or 3 events. And now we're like cleaning up the 3 and 4% left of the 90 we already killed, and now we're coming out into the spring. To me, it seems like we're on a hamster wheel at some point. I know it's a necessary evil, but my mind, as a farmer and as a businessman, I look at this equation and I'm thinking, okay, if we're knocking down these mites the best that we can, and if our yards are clean, if we're in areas where we don't have a lot of pressure from beekeepers elsewhere, these mites keep coming back in full force every single year, either from feral colonies, neighboring colonies, you name it. We spend so much time and energy and influence on trying to knock down the varroa mites. Hopefully small hive beetles, yes, I know there's information out there that they're carrying deformed wing virus and and hopefully that never becomes a problem. But at what point, are we not seeing the forest for the trees here? Have you gotten into do you study or work or have any data on the virology with the honeybee? Meaning, is there anything else that we can be doing other than just trying to knock down mites? Is there anything else we can do? And I don't mean necessarily from a hygienic standpoint or a grooming standpoint to remove the mites from the equation. Where my mind goes is there something that we can be doing to increase, boost, or work on the immune response to bees to where all these viruses don't impact them quite as much? And then we can does that make sense? I don't know that I have the right question, but it just seems like the viral impact is as important or more. It's more important than whether or not how many mites we have in our counts.
Mm-hmm. I think, Cameron, you're muted.
I was hoping it wasn't. He's got a great answer there. Cameron, check your mic. See if you're muted. He got fuzzy there. Maybe it's the internet. Maybe his kids are on Netflix at the same time too, like mine. Let's see. Check your. While Cameron checks his connection there, not yet. Nothing yet. Your mic shows unmuted, but you look blurry. I wonder if it's just a bandwidth thing. I really want you to tackle that question because I think it's one that we struggle with. It's a big deal. Yes, we need the studies, we need the science, we need the data on mites because we can correlate where the viral loads come from. Of course, they come from the mites. But at what point do we start looking and digging a little deeper into the viral impact and what we can do to try to get? Do our bees evolve into a situation where there is less of an impact, that there's more resistance to these viral strains? I think without going down this other rabbit hole, fellas, it seems as though that while Cameron's getting back online here, it's Brian, what is that really fancy word that we use when we are projecting our human thought, emotion, expression, and feelings onto anything else in the animal or plant kingdom?
You want me to say it?
I want you to say it. Say it, Brian.
Anthropomorphize.
Anthropomorphize.
Mm-hmm.
It gets very tricky, right? Especially now in the times that we're seeing ourselves in, where if we look back at the last 3 to 4 or 5 years on disease and viral impacts and flu and things like that, and what that means for our body and how we evolve, what measures we all take, and the choices that we take to put our bodies in a position to create some, let's say, natural immunity, or maybe. There he is. Can you hear us now? No, nothing there. What in the world's going
I
on?
wonder. So Cameron, the lower portion of the screen, you should see where it says mute, stop cam, and then there's a settings. If you select settings, you'll have an audio option, and then you could test your audio. Maybe every once in a while on my computer will do this. It'll switch the microphones. So maybe it's something in the audio settings.
And he's getting blurry. I don't wonder if it's a bandwidth thing there. For folks wondering, no, this is not a conspiracy theory. Take your tinfoil hats off. It's not the University of Florida shutting him down so he can't answer these important questions. No, I think we just got a tech glitch here.
Yeah.
Man, Cameron, your facial expressions and what I think I can almost see you saying is like, oh my God, I want to hear it even more. Let's say he's pulling his hair out. This is like, yeah, this is. I guess we're gonna have to have you back on another time to really go down the rabbit hole even further, because I think we all of a sudden just started scratching some questions that they're challenging, they're uncomfortable, they're difficult, but they need asked and they need worked through, and we need to find some answers. The EPA shut him down. That's hilarious. Cameron, I'm sorry we're having some technical difficulties there. We really appreciate you taking the time to be on with us tonight. It's these kind of conversations where there is no judging. It's all about doing the best we can for our bees, finding ways to work together, no matter where our strengths and weaknesses are. It's having these kind of conversations that I really think moves us all forward. It is the rising tide raises all ships in these kind of situations there. So Cameron, I want to thank you for spending so much time with us tonight. Now we have a great excuse where you have to come back on to follow up on a couple of these questions. So thumbs up. Thanks. Thanks again, Cameron. We will talk to you soon. We're going to carry the conversation on here a little further, and we'll look forward to chatting with you in the future. Thanks again, Cameron Jack.
Yes, sir.
Oh man.
That was
the most
that was like the most suspenseful, like just what in the world. Wow.
Yeah, I wonder did he get all the way off and try to come back on, or
he did.
Yeah,
he even tried to get back on. Bandwidth on these things is so tricky.
Oh yeah.
I can't believe I'm actually operating at a decent bandwidth tonight with everything going on. But guys, what are your let's have a little recap here, and then let's close down the conversation we just had with Cameron Jack with some final thoughts, and then let's have some updates with you guys on what you've been up to and what you're looking forward to. Bruce, let's start with you. What are some of your final thoughts on tonight's conversation with Cameron Jack?
Well, I used to think that Cameron was kind of anti-oxalic acid vapor or oxalic acid, and I realized as I've listened to him more that that's not the case. It's just the label dose just doesn't work. And I remember a couple of years ago, or maybe it's within the past year, he did a video with Cayman, and they talked about that a little bit and kind of jumped on, and it felt like they were jumping on like oxalic acid a little bit at the first part of the video. But he's just awesome. He's reasonable. And I think tonight it seems like the videos I've seen with him on have mostly been about oxalic acid. So this was a good look into his views on different products and the overall treatment scheme. And maybe I just haven't seen enough of his stuff to see some of that. But I just think I'm kind of, in my personal experience, I'm kind of getting in a little bit better groove. I'm still not where I need to be. Obviously, I don't know if any of us really are, but I'm trying to I'm getting more intentional with the treatments, with the testing. And I still, I don't test all the colonies. I know someone asked that question in the comments earlier. Do you test all of them? If you've got just a few colonies, you can do that. But if you've got a lot, you just can't. It's very difficult to test every single colony. But another question I wanted to ask was, what about those bee yards that have a mite bomb in them, where you've got, you've got 10, you've got like 1% of the colonies have a really high mite load, and the rest are well within threshold, may have 1 or 2 mites in the test. And then you got one that has 30, like the one I had in my backyard. What do you treat them all, or do you just treat the one? That would have been an interesting question to ask him. And the conversation kind of went a different direction and was actually getting into, it was gotten more and more intense as we went along. It was just incredible. But I think that the whole takeaway from this is just that, look, they're trying to figure this out from all different levels. The universities are desperately trying to figure it out. I know they're doing a lot of work up at Auburn and Georgia, Florida. There's several universities that are really just working on this problem right now. And I think they probably all have the same frustrations. I think some of these universities are actually working together on some of these projects. And so it's kind of neat to see how hard they're working at it. But I do think there's a couple of important parts to this. There's that research piece that they're doing. I see that. Yeah, I have mine here too. I'm gonna put it up here. Right here. The research piece that they're doing. But then you've got the people in the field that, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of beekeepers out there that are kind of testing things, ourselves on working with things. And so you just have to develop a program. You have to test. That's the biggest thing I've learned the last couple of years is, look, you can just treat your mites and treat them. But if you don't know if it's working, is it really what you need to be doing? You can't really develop a successful program if you're not testing the results of what you're doing before and after. You just don't know. You have no idea. It's like when you catch a swarm, you don't know what you're getting. If you just treat for mites, blanket randomly, just throw products on there, and you don't see if they're working or not, you don't really know what's going on. You don't know the real condition of your bees. And so I think he went right along with that. He said the 3 steps of mite treatment program. Number 1, monitor your mites. Number 2, treat before they become a bigger problem. And number 3, back to number 1, monitor your mites. And that's exactly what you have to do. You have to monitor, treat when needed, monitor. It's just this circle. It's a cycle. You have to keep going around and around and around. And I don't know how you figure out exactly how often to do that. I'm not sure. He's mentioned once a month during production time. But you just got to have an idea of what's going on in those hives or colonies, or you're never going to be able to lick the problem or really know what you're dealing with. Same thing, honestly, when you talk to people like Corey Stevens and Ashby Miller and these people that are doing the VSH type testing, they are very, very strict and intentional on their testing protocols. I mean, they're checking those bees to see what's going on. You hear a lot of treatment-free beekeepers out there that just it seems to me like they're putting bees in boxes and just let it survival of the fittest. They really don't know what they're dealing with. But these people like Corey and people are developing these lines. I think it's a 2-tiered approach. You got to have the mite treatments and the mite testing program, and then you also need to have those people who are developing these stronger, more mite resistant stock. I think it's the two. I think those things are going to come together in the future. If I'm not mistaken, one of the folks I talked to, maybe it was Corey or one of the people I talked to, maybe it was you, Greg, the thought was, if you can even eliminate 1 treatment per year, how much more cost effective would that be for beekeepers, especially large scale beekeepers? If you could just knock those mites down enough to eliminate 1 treatment a year of a product, how cool would that be in time and money? And so it's a ongoing process. More and more people are getting involved. And man, if we can just all get on the same page and combine the universities, the studies, all the research, the Randy Olivers, the Corey Stevens, all of us, what you're doing, Greg, all the queen breeders, we're going to be able to develop a much better bee and have more successful beekeepers in the world. So I think it's pretty cool, everything that's going on.
Yeah, those are great.
Was that a question?
Well, do we ever really have a pointed question? It's usually, it kind of goes somewhere else. But before we move on, Bruce and Brian, I want to thank you both for the super chats tonight, and also Lisa, the Grammy Midwife Suburban Homestead. Lisa, thanks for that super chat. If you guys haven't already, be sure to go check out the YouTube channel, Grammy Midwife Suburban Homestead. She's doing all kind of great stuff, from growing everything, growing vegetables, growing critters, growing bees, and having a lot of fun doing it. So be sure to check out her YouTube channel. These kind of conversations, Bruce, is there are no answers. Maybe this podcast would be better called the never find an answer rabbit hole. But I think it's not so learning to find answers. It's learning to think through something. It's learning to try the right questions on what it is you're struggling with, to try to get you, kind of further along. Brian,
Greg's getting grainy now too. I think somebody must be coming into there. They're shutting
There
us
must
down.
quick. Where's my tinfoil hat? I don't have to put one
We're,
on.
we're creating too many waves in the universe tonight. They're shutting us down.
Yeah,
It
man.
seems like it. Hayden Maxwell, thank you for your $10 super chat. His comment: if it wasn't for my time crunch running a winery and meat market, I would be able to do this type of stuff y'all talk about. Because I don't have the time, I feel like I can't dive in and make plans. Well, Hayden, thanks for the super chat. And man, yes, that's the, there's a fine line between having the time to do something and making the time to do something. And when you have so many irons in the fire, you usually have a list of priorities. Where is there a human life in jeopardy? No. Okay. Is there an animal life in jeopardy? No. Is there a plant life in jeopardy? No. And then it's rinse, repeat, and you just start over and over and over again. When you have too many irons in the fire, it's, sometimes we can't do the best job we can for each one of those irons. And I think one thing to think about is, as Brian is chasing this sideliner's dream of 50, 75, 125 colonies, this is just a reminder for folks out there: quality over quantity. If you are out there chasing a number because you think you are going to have self-worth or relevancy or whatever by growing your bee yard to a certain number, but let's say the number's 100 and they're all operating at 40% potential, 40%. What if we had 40 colonies and they were actually at 90% potential? You would have way more of an asset there. The only difference is your mindset, and your mindset's way more important than your skill set. And it's one of those things, as we keep going further with this talk about varroa mites and keeping our colonies clean, it is literally so hard. You can get so lost in the weeds so quick by thinking that all we have to do is remove varroa mites from the equation. I'll say it, whether it's right or wrong, it's on my heart, so I'll just let it loose. I think we're spending way too much time trying to remove mites from the equation. We're only focusing on the mite equation. If we look at what the big problem with the mites are, it's the viral loads. What can we be doing to increase the health and resiliency of our bees when it comes to combating viral loads? That's the big question. I mean, no disrespect for those who are spending their time and energy and resources developing varroa sensitive hygiene or this or that or the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
But none of that matters if one virus comes along and wipes the bees out. If one rogue virus strain comes out that we can't even see coming, to me, that's more scary than mite numbers. We have all found ways where we can keep our mite numbers down at a pretty close to acceptable number. Is it as good as we want? No. But it seems like when our bees have the highest nutrition, when we have the best quality queens out there, and we're doing the things to knock as much mites down we can, it's a buffer. When something is healthy, it has built-in resiliency. It's its own buffer. If they don't have nutrition at all, if they have poor diet and they're poor queens and mites come across, it seems as though they're getting their tails whipped every day of the week. But when it's vice versa and they are healthy and they've got the nutrition, there is just something about resiliency within a colony to be able to withstand the ebb and flow of whatever the boogeyman of the day is. It might be mites right now. It used to be tracheal mites. Maybe it'll be trophy here in the future. Who knows what it actually might be? But I just can't help to think, as we are constantly having, it's almost the same conversation over and over and over again, which is, how do I get mites out of my colony? How do I treat for mites? What's the best product to use for mites? I get it. That's where we're at with all these things. But if we're not thinking a little deeper than that, and we're not taking that conversation into some really uncomfortable, scary, uncharted waters that there are no answers for, it seems like, then I don't think we're going to move this conversation any much further. 5 years from now, we're going to have the same conversation, and we're all going to be so sick and tired of talking about what's the best treatment, what's the best approach, when's the best time to use it, da 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 da. I get it.
Mhm.
But man, can we start thinking about the viral response of these bees and what we can do to build up a resilient, stout, hardy bee?
Sure. I agree. And I think, Greg, that the experience I've had so far, the limited experience with your bees, they've been testing low and they look healthy. The ones that, the stronger ones are looking healthy. And I think you've got a pretty, Corey used the term rugged bee. He used the term rugged Missouri bee or whatever it was. I think rugged is a good word for what we're looking for. They can have the good qualities. They can have the gentle personality. They can have the gentle attitude. They can have all the things that you want, but still be pretty tough and rugged. That's really what we're looking for, is something that can kind of be resistant to everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the ideal thing that I think we're reaching for, kind of try to keep things in check so that we keep our bees alive, but always be in search of that rugged bee that can just handle whatever's thrown at it. And so I think that's what kind of where you're getting at. And I think that's what a lot of people are trying to do. I think people are trying to hone in on that, but I completely agree with you. It's a multi-tiered approach. And, I found that when I have colonies that have good, strong young queens, they seem to be healthier, regardless. It's like the queen, it's a 3-tiered approach. You've got the great queens, the dead mites, and the proper nutrition. It's not just the mites. So many people focus, like you said, so much on the mites, but there's more to it than that. And I totally agree with what you're talking about. I agree with you 100%.
Mm-hmm.
American Bee Lady, thank you for that super chat. We really appreciate that. It helps us just make sure that we can keep all these things going and moving forward. Really do appreciate you and taking the time out to be here tonight, and also for that $19.99 super chat. Thank you for that, Brian. What are some of your final thoughts with the conversation with Dr. Cameron Jack?
I tell you, the number one thing, well, I mean, I guess it's just spot on for what Bruce said. Check your mite counts, treat, and then it's just circle back around, and that's in, you'll see on the second level of the beekeeper program, they do talk about, the IPMs and number one that is preached, it's what are your mite counts? I mean, it's just, you have to know what your mite counts are. And even I see a lot of people where they want to treat just to treat. But also, I always ask people, when you treated, did you do a mite wash after? And the reason being is typically, if you're looking at Apivar or Apigard, any of those products, there's a lot number. Why do they have a lot number? If you're seeing poor results,
right,
you can circle back around, contact that company and say, hey, I used your product and here's where my mite counts were before. After I did your product, and this is the dose that I used, I followed by the book, utilizing your product. Afterwards, my mite counts were this. What the company can do then, and I talked to somebody before that worked with Apivar doing this, is they actually looked at in their logs, well, was there something wrong? So it just all goes full circle by doing those mite counts and, keeping just an eye on your colonies. It's just, I can't stress the importance of it. I mean, I learned the hard way. So I learned just the hard way. You have to keep an eye on things. It's just so important. It's so key.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
It's not just the mites, it's the entire colony health. So you just made a really good point, Greg, with that. Not just the mites, but they are a critical part of that.
It's just it's just one piece of the puzzle. Is it,
Brian? I appreciate what you said there, because it's like I said, it's hard for a lot of folks to get there. We all want to be there in a place where we feel like we have a grasp and an understanding of what it is that we're doing with our beekeeping. It's one thing to say, I love bees. I love what they can do for my mental situation or physical or spiritual. I love that they can connect me to things that are greater than myself and people that I would have never thought we would have been brought into our life. But to try to do right by them and keep them healthy and keep them alive and keep them moving forward gets to be extremely challenging, to say the least, because we are looking at a critter with a finite existence here on Earth, a very finite picture. What is the role and purpose of the honeybee? Well, if we look to how the honeybee exists in nature, a lot of folks don't want to look at that. A lot of folks don't want to say, well, okay, if we are going to work with nature rather than against it, if the honeybee out here on our 100-acre woods has a 30% chance of survival every single year, okay, accept it. If that's what it really is, if we're taking those critters and we're putting them into a box and we're caring after them, if we want more than a 30% yield or return on that investment, it's a different story altogether. And so I think a lot of times we're operating, we're dabbling across lines that we don't fully quite understand. We're taking something in the natural world that Mother Nature maybe only needs 30% of them to survive every single year to fulfill the role that the honeybee was intended to do. But when we bring them and we invest in them emotionally and financially, and we bring them into a situation, and now we are beekeepers, and here's all the equipment, and now we have to have honey, and it's a commodity. Well, everything changes really quick. And our thought process, how we look at it, our relationship with it also changes. And that's a really tricky thing. If we spend any kind of time actually thinking about it and appreciate that, it gets to be a little bit different. I'm reminded of when Hayden Maxwell. I'd like to have a conversation with you in the future, because we came into this beekeeping thing through the regenerative agriculture lens. Beekeeping was a companion to all the things that we were doing here on the homestead and farm. And while indeed it was a companion and it was a force multiplier, and we leveraged the strengths of all the different enterprises on the farm, we gravitated towards beekeeping. We were called to be beekeepers, and that's what the vision and our purpose on the farm was moving forward. But I'm reminded of that time before I had the knowledge. I'm reminded of the time where I was running on nothing but passion, to where we had the conversation that when we are going to bring pigs onto the farm, if those pigs can't survive on their own, we're just going to let them die. And we actually had those thoughts. Now, the reason I bring that up is we also had those thoughts with bees too. But I can remember, and I've got a photo of it. I don't think it's not in my presentation, and Brian reminds me of the presentation that I just gave in West Virginia. I'd like to put this piece of the puzzle in there, because when I've told myself that we're not going to help these animals along if they can't help themselves, that Mother Nature has to figure this out. They have to work within this system and not need us. That was all well and good until Greg decides to bring heritage hair pigs into the forest to do what he thought they were supposed to do. And in March time, these little piglets that I took responsibility for to bring onto the farm start coughing. And you hear it, and it's 1, it's 2, it's 3, it's 4, it's 5 of them, it's 6 of them, it's all of them. And that cough intensifies. And you look at that animal and they're miserable. We had a choice. Do we let these animals die because somehow they can't exist in this natural environment we put them in? Or do we do something for them? Well, my entire outlook on animal husbandry changed right then and there in that moment, because as that piglet died in my arms, I knew I couldn't let that happen again. So whether it's our pigs, our cows, or our bees, we've got to take responsibility for them. We've got to do the best that we can for them. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes we don't have the answers. We don't know what to do. But we got to keep trying. We got to keep pushing forward. We got to keep doing what's right by our animals, including the bees.
Yeah, I've heard, there's a friend of mine that's very natural with everything that he does, and I've heard just exactly what you said, Greg, in that, Basically the thought is, if God wanted me to have these animals, these bugs in a box, these whatever, why do I have to treat them? God will, I'll have these healthy animals. But we also, I look at it in that we've been blessed with the knowledge on how to care for these animals, how to care for these bugs in a box. So why not take that knowledge that's been passed on to us and use it? It's such a blessing having that, that we can, instead of having, honeybees in our area, 30% chance of survival, and we can increase that percentage to whatever it might be. I mean, why not utilize that information?
Right.
I'm with you. I mean, I've never owned any other farm animals, but yeah, that would tear my gut in half being in that situation also. Yeah.
As soon as you take them out of nature and put them in a box within a few feet of each other, then you have stewardship over those bees. It's
Yep.
they're no longer doing what they would do in nature. In nature, they wouldn't be that close together. They wouldn't be
Yep.
in that particular type of a
Yep.
sized cavity over and over and over again. They kind of have it figured out in nature, and still, I think there's quite a bit of loss in nature, but they don't do it the same way in nature as they do. So as soon as you take responsibility, as soon as you put them in the box, you need to take responsibility. You become their steward at that point in time. There's nothing wrong with that, but you do become their steward, and I believe the Lord's giving the opportunity to do that. And so same thing with, there are wild hogs, they're all over the place that survive in nature, but if you have domesticated animals, you need to take care of them. And so that's a great point, guys. I mean, it's important that we realize that we are dealing with something that we have stewardship over. And I do believe in my gut that there are people who have developed quote unquote varroa hygienic and treatment free bees, but it is a painstakingly long process to get that to that point. And it's just, you just have to work on it, and it has to be scientific and intentional. You can't just do the old, I'm going to throw 10 hives in boxes and just whichever one survive, I'll keep, and then keep you're getting new bees every year and keep doing that until I have a survivor stock. That's going to take years and years. And you really don't, there's nothing really scientific about that. You really don't know for sure if you have a tough stock or rugged stock or not, if you're just replacing them every year. I've had some colonies that do last for years, and they seem to be very varroa sensitive, and then they end up dying out one year, and then what do you have? And so I think it's just you just have to be, there's that word again, intentional about what you're doing. You have to know what you're doing, why you're doing it. Every time you go in that box, every time you work with your bees, there has to be a purpose, and you have to have an idea of what you're doing. If you're haphazard about it, then you're going to have a haphazard result. You may have one year where you have 90% survival and then lose 90% the next year. And if you're intentional and you work at it and you try to figure it out, you're going to get better and better and better as time goes on. But if you just keep doing the same thing over and over again, you'll never learn, you'll never grow. That's just my opinion on it. And I've gotten more and more, more and more committed to that principle as I've kept bees longer, that you just have to take responsibility, and you just have to try and figure out what to do to help them succeed.
Great thoughts, Bruce. I think we all are echoing that place of responsibility for the blessings and the gifts that we are given on this earth, and trying to do the best that we can with it to create abundance with that, to do the things that we feel called to do. And it's a great challenge. And I think that those, I'll say it, it's going to be unpopular, but I don't believe that there are treatment-free bees out there, that there are bees that are hygienic enough to create generations of bees moving forward from that same stock. I believe that those exist in their individual pockets, but I'm not convinced that those bees, when taken out of their context, out of their biome, and moved into another ecosystem, with different flora and fauna and soil microbiology and pests and pressures and weather, I'm not sure that that works. And I think
agree.
that's a real challenge, because
Mhm.
if this were to actually be working, wouldn't we all want that? Wouldn't that be all over the place? How many of us have lost tens of thousands of dollars trying to develop something that we could get consistent results year after year after year, but we can't? I'm not saying that these bees don't exist for somebody somewhere. I 100% believe that they do. I'm not convinced that those traits and expressions and behaviors can be taken out of that context and biome into all other places and perform the same way, which opens up an entire can of worms that we don't
Yeah,
have
that's
time
a
for
other
tonight. But
conversation.
that gets into what are you doing in your area for your bees to try to make better bees. And that's a
That's
whole
right.
other conversation for another time.
Yeah.
Sounds like a topic.
Rob
Sounds like-
Searcy, I want to thank you for that 1999 super chat. I really appreciate you guys. You guys know us by now. We've got thick skin and broad shoulders. We own our words. We're sharing our experience with our bees, what's on our heart, what's on our mind. And we don't have all the answers for any of these things. And that's why we have these conversations like tonight with Dr. Cameron Jack, to try to sort through some of these details, some of the data, the science, the practicality of it. How do we blend the two together? How do we all push everything in a positive forward direction where the bees are living? It's a big deal, and it feels like for every one question we ask, 3 or 4 or 5 more kind of pop up. So I appreciate everyone hanging in there tonight with us for tonight's conversation with Dr. Cameron Jack, the University of Florida. We dug into varroa mites, kind of where do they fit into this management program for all of us, and what can we do to kind of bridge the science and the practical side of beekeeping together. I feel like I learned a lot, not just from Cameron, but from Bruce and Brian, from you guys, and then also the comments and the conversations going on here on the side. I've learned an awful lot from that too, and I think these are the important things to continue to do. To not be afraid to share something that might not be, let's just say, I think it's okay to be a little apprehensive, but I want to encourage folks to be okay with sharing things that maybe are a little out of bounds or a little outside of the boundaries, not in a way to judge or to put pressure on somebody or to cause problems, but that let's have conversations about what do we find is working and why, and do it with no judgment, no condemnation on all the things that we're trying to talk about here. I think this is how we move things forward and have these tough conversations, because it sparks something else. As Bruce replays some of these conversations later, he's going to be, something else is going to trigger, and it's going to keep pushing him in the direction that God's called him to go. And the same for Brian, and the same for me and everybody else. That's why we do these kind of talks and kind of dig and try to find the sweet spot here and try to go down the rabbit holes to see what we can kind of uncover. Bruce, what's coming up for Bruce, Jenny, and Bruce's bees in the next coming week or two?
Real briefly, I know we're getting to the end here, Greg, but I think you mentioned the word. We just open up can of worms and new rabbit holes every time, and we could call it the Rabbit Holes Podcast or whatever you want to call it. But that's why these conversations are so important, I think, because we do address a lot of these issues. We're on here to try and address, and we're not solving any problems, probably, hopefully a few problems here or there, but we're just here to kind of entertain the different ideas. And it's just an opportunity to learn from some of the best and to toss ideas around, to learn from the viewers and from people like Dr. Cameron Jack and so many others. So that's why we're doing this, is to just have this community where we can share those ideas in a comfortable situation. As far as Bruce's bees goes, last couple of weeks have been a little crazy weather wise. We've had some, by our standards, cold weather. I've got everything kind of set up with splits, and so I'm going to start checking on these splits and the early splits I did and this weekend and see what the acceptance rate was. Hopefully we'll start seeing some eggs. I had a great time over in South Georgia with Seth Hill. a week and a half ago or so, and there's a video out on that. Man, what a great day that was. And so I'm about to start doing some follow-up videos on some of the splits I did, some of the things I did a few weeks ago. And we'll look into some of these colonies and see how they're doing. My most popular video, I think, this year so far was the one hive to 4 splits video. And I intend on going into that colony Friday or Saturday and seeing what they look like. I just peeked in on them briefly and added a box to one of them, but I haven't gone through them to see what the results were yet. So I have no idea what I'm going to find. I haven't really, in 2 or 3 weeks, I really haven't even looked into those colonies to speak of. And so that's kind of what's coming up, is some follow-up videos. I'd encourage you, it's springtime now, and if you're checking for your mites, if you want to treat, and if you want to use Formic Pro, I've got a couple of videos that came out this weekend, one of which was my first time trying the Formic Pro, and the second video was a follow-up to explain a mistake I made. If you're interested in it, if you're scared of it, if you have any thoughts, I think there's some pretty good information in there. In the second video, I actually had Tom Nolan come on. He's the rep from NOD Apiary Products, the Formic Pro developers, and he walked me through what I did wrong and kind of proper applications. So I think it's some valuable stuff. I didn't intend on doing that second video until I realized I did something wrong with the first one. And so I think they worked out pretty well, but just going to be doing some videos, follow-up stuff. It's about to get crazy here. Pollination bees are coming back in the next week or two. And it's just going to be game on. You know, I've got some viewers, some local folks that may come and help me out with some of this stuff. And it's just going to be, I hope I'm ready. It's going to be game on. It's going to be a lot of fun. So then as far as the channel goes, man, just going to keep just documenting what I'm doing and trying to share things that'll help folks out. You know, that's all I'm trying to do. We've got some interviews coming up. An interview is going to drop tomorrow or Friday night with Craig Branch that I did a couple of nights ago. I'm trying to get that, you know, edited and properly, you know, processed for YouTube. And so that'll be dropping on the Intentional Beekeeping video podcast or playlist on my channel. So lots of stuff going on. It's a lot of fun. I did also hit a landmark a few days ago, 20,000 subscribers, which is a big deal. To me. I'm not. Thank you. Right. I'm not going to do any kind of great big giveaway or anything, because to me, it's just the beginning. I'm trying to, you know, keep growing this thing, and hopefully we'll continue to, with folks like you guys out there, and hopefully some new folks will be able to do that together. And so I appreciate all the support, but big times ahead and fun times ahead and a lot of work.
Looking forward to Bruce, to seeing what you're up to. It's the time of the year I feel guilty. I'm sure you guys do too, where it's nearly impossible to stay up with everyone's videos, and you might see a thumbnail or something that comes across and you're thinking, oh man, and then it's just the day gets on, and then the week, and then the month. But I love what you're doing, Bruce, and I know you're going to keep up the good work there. And congratulations on 20,000. That's a big deal. And I think what you'll see is you hit 20,000, your rate of exponential growth will just start skyrocketing. And so looking forward to seeing how your channel, not only your channel grows, but how you grow as a beekeeper and that message that you share with your audience. So keep up the good work, Bruce.
I appreciate that. The algorithm is tough, though. The algorithm is tough, though, man. I'm still trying to figure that thing out.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Brian, how about you, buddy? What's on the docket for the coming week here?
Well, seeing how the weather, at least up north here, we're going to break 50. I think I'm finally going to be able to, this next week, get all the new hive stands built. So, you know, step 1 in the expansion process will be underway. I know I had a couple people ask for a video on that, just because they've seen my hive stands in a couple of my videos, and I got the idea, I will say, from Bug Farmer. So if anybody out there watches Bug Farmer, he does have a video that's probably 2 or so years old, but I'm going to make another one on that. I need to get everything laid out and just basically place everything, at least stand-wise, out in the yard. So that way, depending on what I have coming in, queen-wise, I'll know if I have to get anything else. I think I have everything that I need. I got some couple products that I have to do some videos on that I've been sent. So, you know, we'll have that coming up. A couple different reviews, I think, on 2 different hives from companies. And then I'm going to be working on also been chatting with Hive Alive, and I'm going to run I'm going to get a little detailed on just to run a test on the consumption of Hive Alive pollen patties versus two competitors. So, and I'm going to get down, and for everybody, if you're curious, and I've gotten that question here, have I seen any benefit? How do they take it? I'm going to get down to weighing like the specific and provide everybody with the grams and everything like that. So I'm going to get very detailed with that video. So, but that's going to be coming up, and that'll probably be over a 2 or 3 week period that I work on that. But a little bit, I mean, the weather kind of turning, and I heard the spring peepers yesterday for the very first time in my area. So it's about here, so, and it's going to get very busy. I've kind of been dragging my feet, and I do have, I'll have a little bit more free time in the evenings just because work has told me that we can work remote for like the next 6 or so weeks. So yeah, it's just,
Awesome.
It's amazing how things just all kind of, come full circle around. And I'm sitting there and I'm getting nervous about all the work that I have. And then I go to work and they tell us you can work from home. So, but yeah, it's going to get exciting. I mean, it's really going to get exciting just to see how close to 20 I do get. So yeah, a lot. It'll be fun though. It'll be fun. So
That's great. You're gonna have your hands full, and it's things have a way of working themselves out there. So I'm glad that you're gonna have time to be able to put your stands together and do the things that you want to do. Greg and Burns, who is Burns? That's a question.
I've been wondering this also for the last 2 or 3 streams that we've done. Your name says Greg and Burns. Nature's Image Farm. See,
well, thanks. That's how. Okay.
I didn't say anything.
I didn't even mention that.
No,
until
I
didn't even see it until now. Okay.
I noticed it last week or the week before, and I just thought, well, maybe he's got a friend sitting with him. So.
Speaking of friends that I have sitting here with me, every Sunday night, Susie and I are doing the Sunday night farm chat on the Nature's Image Farm channel. Yeah. And the reason it says Greg and Burns is because usually it says Greg and Susan
Yep.
Burns.
Yeah.
And so it looks like there's no Susan, and it says Greg and Burns. So now you know.
The rest of the story. The rest
of the story. But Brian, you got your hands full, and that's it's great that the season's turning around. Here at the farm, guys, I feel like every time I'm like a broken record. I just get on here and say it's chaotic, it's busy. I don't know how we're gonna get all the things done, but then somehow we manage to, get things where they're supposed to be in just the right amount of time. But our spring peepers have been going on for 3 weeks right now. We just got in and went through a bunch of colonies. Guys, I have drones. Not only do I have sealed drones, I have drones walking inside of my colonies. My brood is at this beautiful growth stage. Like, it's not exploding out of the middle of nowhere. It's this. They've got this. I don't even know how to explain it. It's just right. Like, they are in tune with nature. And when the peepers started, they just started moving on up. And a couple of these colonies that were, especially the ones that are in doubles, drones everywhere. So for me, every time I look in some of these colonies, it just reinforces some of the things that we did. And it reaffirms the choices that we've made, not only with keeping the mites down and try to keep the viral loads down off our colonies so they can perform, but a lot of the things that we did and doubled down on, the Hive Alive fondant, I think, was one of the biggest game changers in the wintertime, getting away from dry sugar and putting that on. I've never seen our bees look this good. They're just they're on the precipice of busting. They're just getting ready to take off and go, and they just have a certain vibrancy to them that I just haven't seen before. And it's easy for us to understand, and we have to be careful with anthropomorphizing, right, Brian? But it's easy for us to where when our gut biome is right and we're feeling healthy, you just feel good. You feel productive. You can go get the things done. Your brain, you can think. You're not cloudy. But as soon as you're not, and you're in a bad position, you're not functioning on all cylinders. You're not doing all the things that you need to do. And man, keeping our gut biome healthy and keeping us moving forward is huge. The bees, I've noticed the same thing. And I think the Hive Alive fondant, especially, I think the secret with that is the thymol. I think has just been absolutely huge. We not only did we feed Hive Alive and all of our syrup on hundreds of colonies last year, but we put the fondant on that many. And now we've got pollen patties, Hive Alive pollen patties on, and they're looking absolutely fantastic. So in that train of thought it seems like right now what I'm learning about the bees is we can keep their gut biome healthy, they can perform. And so just like that little packet that Brian was holding up there, one of the things that we're also going to be doing is incorporating probiotics in our colonies. We did it last year and seen a huge difference in our nuke production. They just seem to be healthier and more prolific. So another thing that we're going to do this year is give everybody several treatments of strong microbials, especially the 801 formula. Not that our bees are in high risk places. Our bees are not in high risk areas where they're going to be in touch with any kind of contaminate or fungicide or pesticide. But with that they now have 8 different bacillus strains that we can now incorporate into our beekeeping that can help with the bees' gut biome. We know what lactobacillus and lacto-fermented foods and things like that does for our gut health. So I think there's something to be said about considering something like that as well for the bees. So we're gonna be doing that too, just to help keep our bees moving forward. This is gonna be one of those years. I'm gonna say it. I don't mean to hurt your feelings. I don't mean to step on your toes. But all of you out there who wait around for everyone to tell you when to start the race, when to get going, if you're out there waiting and cruising all the Facebook groups for someone to tell you and give you permission to start beekeeping this year, to start doing the things to keep your bees healthy, I want to challenge you to break free of that kind of thinking. At the end of last year, the woolly caterpillar came, showed us what the winter was going to hold. We doubled down. We made choices based on that, and now our bees have been in a position where they have been growing and they've been healthy for weeks now. Before spring came, because spring came early. We saw the signs. The trees don't lie. They told us what to do next. We did it. Our bees have never looked better. So I want to challenge everybody out there. If you're waiting for permission, if you're waiting for instruction or direction from somebody to go do what you need to do with your bees, go spend some time with your bees. Get that thinking chair out there. Look to the trees. Look at the signs that nature's providing and go after it. It's one of the biggest things that you can do. That being said, our bees are looking fantastic. I'm just about sold out for nukes of the year. Almost sold out on the package run on our first, and the second one's filling up too. If you're interested and you want to get, there's only not a lot left on the nukes, or you want the April 8th pickup for packages, you can go to our website at naturesimagefarm.com. Check us out. We're still taking orders for queens, and we also have availability for the April the 29th package delivery. We hit Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland, and then back home to the farm here in Zanesville. We'd love to see you. We'd love to have you. I want to remind folks that if you're a military veteran or if you're a customer of ours on bees, we have a free hands-on learning yard. No politics. There's no BS. It's about you and creating opportunities where you can be encouraged and gain confidence working these bees to give you a point of reference. So now you can go back home and learn from your bees too. It's something that we can do to help support those that support us every other Saturday here at the farm in Zanesville, Nature's Image Farm, the Learning Yard. We'd love to have you check it out. That being said, guys, if you're listening to this on the Nature's Image Farm podcast, if you're listening tonight live or you're checking out the replay later, I want to thank you for spending time with us all. Bruce and Brian, I just want to thank you guys too for all the effort that you guys do individually on your YouTube channels, what you do on your social media, who you are as people, what you do for others to be a lighthouse. That's important because when we all come together as the stream team, you know, we are the sum of those who we surround ourselves with. You guys doing great come together. It all makes this even that much more special and more impactful for other folks. So I want to thank you guys for everything that you guys do. All kind of new stuff to be out on the lookout. Just a quick shout out to all the folks at the Mountaineers Beekeepers Association, the Honey in the Hills Beekeeping Conference. What a great trip. A lot more to say on that. But these folks took it upon themselves to bring top-notch beekeeping vendors and education to the folks in the Appalachians there in West Virginia. They were sold out, over 400 people, jam-packed, beautiful place, a beautiful conference, an amazing time. A lot of lives were changed. A lot of impact, I think, was made in folks in their beekeeping. So my hat tip to all the folks there that made that possible. You guys are awesome. It was a tremendous honor to be a part of that. We are going to have so many interviews coming out with folks like Dr. Robin Underwood, Dr. Humberto. We've got Coron from APAME, the folks behind the scenes with the conference, Rob Pollock. We've got Brian Coper and many more. Looking forward to getting those and that interview series, the Honey in the Hills, out too as the year progresses. But that's what it's about, folks, is being a lighthouse to other, just being a part of each other's lives when we can to support each other. That's what it's all about. I want to thank you for all your support. As always, guys, I want to remind you to be the lighthouse and be the change that you want to see in this world. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.